Well, good afternoon, and thanks for joining our Texas Public Policy Foundation Monday live stream. I'm Kevin Roberts, have the privilege of serving as executive director of the foundation. And as you know, over the last few months, we haven't been shy about covering the issues of the day, whether that be the health emergency that we were in, the government emergency that we continue to be in, and of course, all kidding aside, in the last couple of months, last few weeks especially, the situation of Americans on both sides of the ideological aisle, understanding that we need to come together and have conversations before we worry about going out and producing discord. So the genesis of today's episode was a series of conversations we had here internally, which was, how can we as Texans, whether as I am today at TPPF World Headquarters in Austin, waking up in Texas, able to provide a way forward, or for our colleagues who work in other states, and two colleagues I'll introduce here momentarily, do something to move us from the discord that has really distinguished the last month or two in America to proper discourse. And I think the point is, and I know this is a countervailing notion to what radicals would want us to believe, is that regardless of our differences, regardless of the differences we have in skin color, in background, in religion, and where we grew up, and the experiences we had, that as Americans and as Texans, whether born here or adopted, we have a moral obligation to come together and have a conversation on behalf of this society to figure out what's wrong, and most importantly, to figure out how we can solve that. And what is not going to lead us to solutions is a series of disruption, especially violence. What is going to lead us to solutions, we hope, are conversations like this. And I'm hopeful that you were able to join us last week, where our colleagues, Dr. Richard Johnson and Randy Peterson, came together for the same kind of conversation. This, in a lot of ways, is part two, if you will, of that conversation about how to personify, we hope, having hard conversations about race relations and policing and the history of the country, but in no way to denigrate any of the institutions that we hold dear. Instead, to recognize that in 2020, hundreds of years after the founding of this country, that we ought to be able to get together and talk about how great it is that we can wake up in the United States of America, the blessings that come from that, and also recognize that our future really should be brighter than our past. So with that, it is just so gratifying to introduce not just two colleagues, but two friends. First, Alice Johnson, our senior fellow with Right on Crime, and second, a longtime friend of mine who's our state director for Right on Crime in Louisiana, Scott Peyton. Alice and Scott, we'll get into the conversation here shortly, and I'll ask you to give us some overview comments. But first, let me just say on behalf of our audience, thanks so much for making time for this.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you. This is a very important time and a very important discussion that must take place.
It is. And I think what our audience will realize, if they haven't seen either of you talk, is that you provide an example of how these kinds of conversations should happen. In fact, as our audience will soon discover, each of you with your personal and professional experiences to this very moment of being in this conversation have exhibited how we ought to go about those conversations as Americans. And Alice, I think you said it well a few moments ago as we were preparing to go live, which is that the loudest voices are getting the most attention. You know, our media, for better and for worse, have an incentive to cover the most vocal. And it's unfortunate in the last month that the most vocal have also been the most radical. They've been the people who are least willing, it seems, to have a rational, reasonable conversation. And so what we're going to do over the next hour is cut through all of that noise. We're going to make our own news. And the news we're going to make is that three friends with very different experiences can sit down and have a conversation about what we believe is the bright future of this country. So Alice, we're going to start with you. And as you know, as is the custom with these live streams, we're going to get into some specific policy questions, both for you and for Scott. But before we do that, in a very Southern way, speaking on behalf of the three Southerners who compose this panel today, we want to get to know you. And so what is sort of your 30,000 foot view of everything that's been going on in this country in 2020?
From my viewpoint, This is different from everything that I've ever seen happen in the past. Well, before I even get started, just thank you for having me on today. And thank you, listeners, for being tuned in, because today is a very important moment for all of us, I believe. We've come together for a discourse, a discussion. We're not coming together screaming at each other. I'm not coming demanding anything. I'm coming to have a sit down, let's say living room talk with you today. Most of you know who I am. Of course, Kevin has introduced me. For those of you who do not, I spent almost 22 years in federal prison as a first-time nonviolent offender. I'm a woman who has experienced many things in my life. I was born in 1955 in Mississippi. So I spent my growing up years all the way until I was almost 24 in Mississippi. But I was a product of those turbulent times that were going on in Mississippi during the civil rights movement, during the protests that took place, during the total disruption in our country. We made it through it. And now we are facing another time in our history. And I can say the world is watching, because we are the standard for the world as how a free nation looks, which includes freedom of expression, to have our voices heard, freedom to protest. Many of us who are really not being heard, we we believe in peaceful protesting, but at no time can we condone any of the violence that is taking place right now. But it seems to be calming down. But there are loud voices. You're going to have acts that are still committed. That's why it's so important that our voices must be out here. I don't know anyone personally, not one person, who wants to see the things happen that is happening right now. From my experiences growing up in Mississippi, I was very much involved. I was very much involved in the things that were going on there. My parents marched in the civil rights movement. I was a teenager when Martin Luther King was assassinated in Memphis, it was only a few miles from where we lived, from where I lived. And I saw the burning. I saw the loudness, I saw the hurt, and I saw the pain. And there is a lot of pain in America right now in the African American community. I think one of the reasons that it's so different is that when the we saw George Floyd, we saw what happened to him. It was right there up front, and it brought back emotions, and it caused just an explosion. Well, now in this moment, as things are starting to quiet down some, and people are, I don't know, first of all, I know no one of any race who was not appalled at what happened to George Floyd, and who is not now hurt over what they're seeing take place in this nation. So just the fact that we're able to have a discourse and a conversation about this brings me hope, because as a Black American, as an African American woman, the things that are important to most of you who are listening, and that's my faith, that is very important to me. My family is very important to me, and my country is very important to me. The word of God tells us that a house divided against itself cannot stand, and neither can a nation divided against itself. And I think we have a common goal, that we want to see this nation, we want to see us come together as a people. But each one of us, it is a time for us to examine our own selves. And that's what the Bible also tells us, to examine your own heart. We can either be a part of the problem, or we can be a part of the solution. And that's the place that I am right now, is I want to use my voice to be a part of voice for peace, for justice, for reconciliation. And there's many other voices out there like mine, and it's time for us to speak up.
Well, that's well said, Alice, and thanks for those opening comments. I think what our audience will hear from you and also from Scott, who will get into the conversation here shortly, is that theme that there is a way of, especially in the United States, thinking about the rights enshrined, not just in our Constitution, but imprinted on our souls by a
Yes.
higher power than even our government, that we ought to be able to have these kinds of conversations. And so I think that's increasingly important as we get deeper into the summer, and the media, frankly, for the most part, are very shrill. We're in election year, as we know, and we're not going to swerve into politics in this conversation. We are very much going to talk about policy, but that's a way of saying that what we can see, because every morning we wake up and we work in the public policy world, is that this country needs to have more serious conversations about
Yes.
people and about policy. A little fewer and fewer conversations, especially the really loud, shrill ones, about other things that really are immaterial compared to those two things. So thanks so much for setting the tone. And Scott, I know you well enough to know you're going to say some similar things, but please, if you don't mind, in sort of the same vein that Alice took, explain for our audience your own experience with the criminal justice system, which has led you to this point where you're heading up our right on crime efforts in the state of Louisiana.
Thank you, Kevin. And Alice, I wholeheartedly agree with everything you have to say. And Kevin, I'm sure you picked the title, but I love the title of our conversation here, From Discord to Discourse. I started out, I grew up in Baton Rouge. I was born and raised in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I have a degree in criminal justice. And right after college, I moved away from Louisiana, like so many people in Louisiana, to Atlanta. And I was a private investigator for 15 years. Came back to Louisiana, ran my own business, and then I moved over to the state of Louisiana and began working in a career in law enforcement, particularly in probation and parole. Also during that time, I discerned a call into the diaconate. I'm an ordained deacon in the Catholic Church. And during that time period, where I moved from private investigations to my own business to public service, people often question, how can you be a deacon and how can you be a law enforcement officer? And people mistake the protect and serve portion. There are many great individuals in law enforcement that are not in law enforcement for the money or the power. They are there to truly try to make a change, to make a difference in their communities. Police, just like in the diaconate, there's a similar role. You are that go-between. As a deacon, I am with the laity, and I'm also with the clergy. As a law enforcement officer, you enforce the laws for your community, but you're also a member of that same community. Yes. And you know, I can still walk into our local grocery stores, and I have people that I encountered during my 10 years in law enforcement that come up and shake my hand, that speak to me. And normally my wife has to ask me, is that someone from church or is that someone from your years as law enforcement? Which is great, because there really should be no difference there in the people that I've encountered. I chose to go into law enforcement with my background in criminal justice. As a probation and parole officer, I worked with thousands of people over that 10-year period that I was there. And I experienced the barriers, the issues that they faced. I also saw their discouragement coming in and out of the system for periods of freedom for 2 or 3 years and going back to prison and coming back in. And I felt, I left many days feeling like I was accomplishing nothing, going in a circle, so to speak. I could only do so much for the 140 people on my caseload. And when this opportunity came forward to join Right on Crime, I really felt like I moved from the trenches of the frontline battle more up to the room with the generals, to where we can lay out a policy and start working on issues and policies that will affect all persons on probation and parole, not just the 140, 150 people that were on my caseload. And this also brings a unique perspective for me, because I'm able to, the statistics that we have of people that come out of prison, the people that go back to prison, people that commit crimes, I spent years with those people. I spent years with their families. I took the phone calls from mamas and girlfriends when their husband or boyfriends went to prison. I worked with them. I saw the effects it had on their family, and even working in the prison system, I began to be a lot more compassionate about sending people back to prison, realizing where I was sending them to, and was I actually going to make them better people by sending them to prison, or do I spend more time and work with them while they're on the street? It's been a long journey, but I think I have been prepared. Nothing's coincidental. I believe God has placed me in certain situations that I could have never been in any other type of job. Would have never been in the homes of people, would have never experienced what I experienced as a law enforcement officer. When the question you posed to Miss Alice about the year 2020, when January came, I was excited. We had a new session coming, a new set of legislators. I was expecting to be a grandfather for the first time in March. Our session began in March. We had Miss Alice and Kelly Paul in Baton Rouge. We had this great opening to stress our reentry package, and then COVID-19 hit. Then we were stuck at home. Uncertainties, anxieties. Our session was put on hold. And like Alice, when I first watched that video of George Floyd, and I could see it, I saw it from a different angle than someone that hasn't been in law enforcement. I saw the actions of the other officers, and realized how officers don't necessarily will correct another officer in public. And I'm quite certain that there's things like that need to change, where they can feel comfortable to tell someone to stop doing something. I know what they were doing as far as protecting the crowds from them, but it hurt as a law enforcement officer, former law enforcement officer, to see that, because I knew what was going to happen. I knew the outrage that would spark, and just as a human person, to watch that was just incredibly troubling. And we have to work to make a change. As the topic of our conversation here, we have to move from this discord, and we have to sit down, and we have to get into discourse, which hopefully will lead us to policy changes and to action to put solutions to the problems that we're facing as a nation and as a people.
Yeah, Scott, thanks so much for that response, because I think what it does, paired with what you, Alice, mentioned, is lead us to the core, or at least what I see as the core of why we're having this conversation, and for that matter, the core of what Right on Crime and the Texas Public Policy Foundation do. And that is, if downstream, and nothing against what's downstream, we've got the media and political campaigns and what Congress does and what state legislatures do. We really see ourselves as being upstream, trying to address some long-standing, I'm even going to use the word systemic problems that we can apply our well-researched policy approach to, and then propose some solutions. But before we propose the solutions, we first have to, as I like to say, read reality truthfully.
Yes.
And when you establish the ability to have a conversation about something, where we're not pointing fingers and we're not screaming at one another, you can actually take a breath and read reality truthfully. And so the heart of our conversation, as I see it, is for our audience to understand what the two of you see as the systemic problems. And I do think that it's problems plural, because we're dealing with humans, and humans are complicated creatures. We all are. And so, Scott, I want to start with you in terms of systemic problems that you see in policing. And I want everyone to know that by asking that question, not only are we not being anti-police, in fact, we're being pro-police, right? Because we really want to be able to focus on those systemic problems so that we can honor the great work of most of our law enforcement officers, for the same reason that our foundation likes to look at education reform, because we love kids and love teachers, right? So Scott, what are one or two of the largest systemic problems in policing? And then Alice, I'll follow up with you about some longer ranging systemic problems in society.
Kevin, law enforcement is definitely a needed function. It's actually a core function
Sure.
of government. Well, I guess what I would like to address is that there's this movement to defund the police departments or to do away with policing in general. That we can't do. We need the rule of law. But what we can look at, and these are some systemic problems, is the way that police are funded. The budgeting, apply our same conservative principles to a transparency of budget to hold them accountable to putting in reforms, putting in programs that are going to keep us safe as a public and ensure that use of force, assure that people's rights are protected and to defend the liberty and to build that trust with community. And I think we'll see that with more transparency. We have a lot of programs and a lot of issues from a policy standpoint that we've tried to address and are continuing to work on, like civil asset forfeiture, which takes the role of policing, from going out into the communities and developing that relationship. It moves policing from protecting the public to enforcing, to collection of fines and fees and more of a monetary focus. And I think drawing policing back to its original function, to enforce the laws, to develop the community and develop that trust with the community is one of the issues that we definitely need to sit down and work together with.
Well, that theme of community is crucial. We heard it last week from Richard Johnson, from Randy Peterson, latter of whom, of course, is a veteran law enforcement officer like you, Scott. I think it's really important. So thank you. And we'll come back to you after Alice jumps in here and talk about some specific policy successes we've had at the legislative level, even at the federal level. But before we do that, Alice, I think it's important for our audience to hear from you based on your experiences when you were born. The fact is, as you said, both kidding, but also being serious, you wake up each day in black skin.
Yes.
The experiences you have that can instruct us. What would you say are the systemic problems in American society that we who fashion ourselves as being able to hear reality truthfully can go out and change together?
Okay. One of the things that I said was we have to each examine ourselves, and it is just the truth. You can have two groups. You can have some young African-American teenagers and another race of teenagers, and the police can cruise by and they're going to stop and see why they are gathering. There are some things that that has to be examined and confronted, as if this is the reality. It's more than likely an African-American person is more than likely to get a harsher sentence. They're more than likely to be afraid when they see the police because the trust needs to be built again. And that's where community comes in. And that's where also training comes in of de-escalating situations. I think that it's a fear sometimes on both sides. When you have not sat down with people, and these are not people that you're used to interacting with, it causes a fear, even on the part of the police officers too, of knowing how to interact with African Americans. And it really has to start with us in community, of us sitting down together and having these type of real conversations. We can't pretend that it does not exist, because it does exist. And I think that now that we are seeing people getting so involved and willing to talk about it, that's the first big step. But we don't want to stay stuck. We are people of action. We don't want to just talk about it. We want to be about it. We want to be about change, because that is our goal too. I don't know any families that don't want to live peacefully with their neighbors. I don't know of any families like that who want to see this. And you can't demand certain things like respect, certain things like trust cannot be demanded. It has to be demonstrated. So I think a lot of that is going to have to be in training of our police and getting them back out into the communities and not seen as the military, but as being part of our communities.
Well, thanks for that comment. I have a number of follow-up questions, but I'll try to limit myself because at some point we'll get to audience questions. But for both of you, staying in this vein of what may be systemic problems in the United States regarding race relations, just harmony across the entire society, our ability to have differences of opinion, for example, without thinking that the world's coming to an end, policing, whatever the case may be. Tell me what you think about this, because we've been researching this very recently at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Over the last 50 years, we've created a new systemic problem. And that new systemic problem is that government has come in, maybe with good intentions, but the effect isn't always that great because government has begun to displace things like churches. It's begun to displace things like nonprofits that would provide services. It's begun to get in the way of even the thinking that we might otherwise have and say, I'm going to go help this person in need because government's going to do it. Are we on track there, or is that off base?
Well, Kevin, I'll jump in there with, and my 10 years with probation and parole is a perfect example. Probation and parole started out way back when with a shoemaker who was a business owner that had a person with a substance abuse and alcohol problem that was going to jail. And so he goes to court, vouches for his employee or possible employee, and he agrees to take on that responsibility, make sure he's going to go to court, basically sober him up. So here you have the first nonprofit in action, so to speak, with a link to business, with a link back to community, keeping a man out of prison that can work. And we have grown from this simple concept of helping someone to this overreaching program. When I was a probation and parole officer, I spent more time filling out 3 forms of a timesheet to prove to the state that I worked the hours I worked, where I could have applied that to someone on my caseload to help them get a job. That was my frustration, is we built this big machine that lost sight of our original mission. And that shoemaker had the original goal there was to help this individual. And you see it in law enforcement as well. As probation and parole officers, we were commissioned law enforcement. And if I didn't shoot straight, literally with my pistol each year, I would no longer hold my commission, nor could I be a probation officer anymore. Now, I have never in 10 years fired my weapon at anyone. Now, it has been drawn because of policy in doing warrants and those type of things, but I have never been in a situation where I felt like I had my weapon drawn to shoot anyone. But my training every year, my job performance relied on firing that weapon. Our training, and the same thing in law enforcement, probation, parole, the training needs to focus to the mission of helping people and realizing what we're doing. Because what we do, we send a false message to the employees. Your job is more important about how straight you shoot, and not the original mission is to help people, to get people back on track through reentry. Because what we do, we create this cycle. And as Ms. Alice has mentioned several times, we begin to take the hope away from people. And without hope, there's despair. Hope means that we believe there's something better to come. We have something to look forward to. And when we take that away through policy, through government, and not let our communities get back in to building the communities. One of the things probationers used to tell me is when I get out of here, I'm moving away from Opelousas, the city that they grew up in. It's like, why leave your community? That you're going to be in the same situation no matter where you go. Let's make your community a better place to live. And I think that's what we're trying to do here, is make our communities, and it grows out, make our nation a great place again to live.
Yeah, well said. Alice, what do you think about that?
Well, the things that I've seen with Right on Crime, that was really the thing that drew me, that attracted me to Right on Crime, to Texas Public Policy Foundation, is that they really are coming up with solutions of being smart on crime. And that's really the things that I love about Right on Crime, is that they are part of the community. They got not only the statistics, but they got the practical too. You've got people who work within Right on Crime, like John Kufos, who from the inside knows what things impacted him, and just listening to others that we were incarcerated with, the things that impacted them while they were reoffending, what things we could have done better to help them not reoffend. And I'm seeing results, not just the theory, but I'm seeing results in the policies that are being put forward.
Sure. Well, thanks for that. So one of the things we do internally as we're vetting policy solutions is to play devil's advocate. So Scott, if you don't mind, I'm gonna play devil's advocate with you. And it's not gonna be Longhorn football versus LSU Tigers football, because we're gonna be able to settle that here in a couple months. But that aside, and maybe not all the audience is so interested in that, but the devil's advocate would be this. They would say, okay, TPPF and Right on Crime, I'm with you in spirit about criminal justice reform, but I see all of these reentry programs you're talking about, and what it seems to me is that surely there has to be a correlation between letting people out of prison early and all of this chaos we're seeing in cities. It's a fair question. If you're just a lay observer, right? So explain what the problem is.
That's an excellent question, Kevin, and it's a question that I get from friends, family members, even from my spouse, who I believe is watching me today. And a lot of it has to do with education, Kevin. We have educating people about the policies that have not worked in the past. For 30 years, at least here in Louisiana, we have relied on incarceration as the answer to all of our problems. As a result, we have the highest crime rate and we have the highest incarceration rate. These things have not worked. What we've taken, though, we've taken nonviolent people. Miss Alice is a perfect example. A nonviolent person sentenced to life for a drug charge. We have murderers that get out of prison before Miss Alice would have, that weren't there for a nonviolent offense. We're talking about taking nonviolent people, finding alternatives to incarceration through programs, through these reentry programs, through probation and parole. And what has happened in the past is we have warehoused people. We have not taken care of or addressed the core issues that are bringing people to prison. We're relying on incarceration to do things that we can't do out here on the street, as far as address mental health, address substance abuse. You can't incarcerate mental health. You can't incarcerate substance abuse out of someone. We have to work what is driving people into prison. Mental health is an issue, substance abuse is an issue, and trying to address these problems. And we're not simply, as conservatives, as just good public policy, we've never advocated for opening the prison doors to simply reduce our incarceration numbers here. What we were trying to fix is years of bad policy and failed policy that has incarcerated people with nonviolent offenses for way too long. And those people we need to address those problems, hopefully on the front end, and not trying to use our prison system as a place to deal with mental health issues and substance abuse issues. But unfortunately, Kevin, when we spoke of loud voices, all it takes is for one person with a criminal background to commit a crime, and then we get into this philosophy that no one needs to be helped, and that second chances can't be offered. As Christians, we believe in redemption. Hope will not be there if we don't believe that you can make a mistake and that you can work your way out of that mistake. Unfortunately, the prison system or the criminal justice system is a debt that seems like it can never be repaid. And that's what people need to go in, pay their debts to society, and society needs to welcome them back with that redemption and second chances and hope as the reoccurring theme that we hear.
Because otherwise, and the data show this clearly, they are far more likely to become repeat offenders, right? And so we've seen that in state after state. Just a little bit of Texas bravado in saying that all of this started in Texas, certainly not the first place you think of is as being anything other than law and order or being a conservative state. And what we know from years of data now, a decade and a half, is that recidivism rates, so repeat offender rates, have gone down among nonviolent offenders. They're coming, what I'd explain to friends and family too, who, and I appreciate their impulse toward the rule of law, right, is those people are finishing their sentence anyway. And so let's address, again, upstream, the problems that led to them going to prison. We're not excusing what they did. Alice will be the first to take ownership of her own offense. But what we are saying is, as a society, is we have a vested interest, both at a policy level, but at a human level, a Christian level, at making sure that that person doesn't go back into prison. And so if anything, I can't imagine a more conservative alternative than one that emphasizes the dignity of that person, the dignity of all of the people in the community they're coming back to, better prepared to be in that community. But Alice, obviously you have a distinctive experience with this. And before we make a pivot here to audience questions, just want to give you an opportunity to weigh in.
Yes, we know that when one person goes to prison, it impacts the communities, the whole family. It's like the whole family does every day of their time with you. That person who could be a contributor in the community is being warehoused, as Scott says, with this whole thing of no opportunity for redemption. Even though I did what was called extraordinary things in prison, extraordinary rehabilitation, and helping the prison population and helping women prepare to be released back into their communities. I literally was able to affect prison culture while I was there. Had it not been for my being granted clemency, I would still be incarcerated today, still there. I spent almost 22 years there. How much more rehabilitation? How much more would it have taken? No parole board would ever have heard my story had I not been granted clemency. And since I've been home, I think that is why I talk so much about this. I'm not doing interviews and being on panels because I want to be famous. It allows the public to see the humanness of the people who are being incarcerated for these long, long sentences. And I do have to applaud Texas for the changes that they have made in their criminal justice system. It has not become a more dangerous place to live because of those changes. It's become a better place to live now because of the changes that have been implemented. And using that as a model for things that Right on Crime is now doing, we're being able to see these things that are impacting other states too. So I'm very hopeful in this time. I know people see the darkness of all the things that are going on around us, and you would think there's no hope because you are seeing the loudest voices, and it is being focused on the bad things that are happening in this nation right now. But I see change that is starting to take place. Change because we are willing to say we cannot go on with business as usual. It's different. We're in a moment of great opportunity where we are sitting down talking, where companies are getting involved, where communities are getting involved. We're able to talk to each other now about what has taken place, and people are willing to listen. I'm not trying to make you, Kevin, or anyone else pay for the things that have taken place in the past, because this is not what you personally have done, but these things have taken place. But to be able to sit down and talk and say, let's move forward now. What can we do to make our living together, our coexisting together, living together as Americans better? What do we want our future for our children to look like? We don't want to raise up angry children who are divided by race. We want to raise up children who are connected and united because we are all in this together. And so that's really how I see us as a path moving forward. It is, we have to take the lead in demonstrating. Individually, we've got to take responsibility for demonstrating how this should look.
That's really well said. You know, and for those of you in the audience, if you have questions and haven't posted your question in the comment section or whatever social media tool you're using to watch this, go ahead and do that. But I'll just make the observation and get your quick responses to this, and then we'll take the first audience question. Just listening to y'all for the last half hour, it seems as if we have created over the last 50 years in America a government machine, and I don't mean that in an anti-government screed kind of way, although there might be some legitimacy to that, but in education, in healthcare, in the criminal justice system, we have decided that the status quo of the system is more important than the dignity of every individual person supposedly served by that system. And that part of the national conversation we need to have is about that, and about emphasizing communities, emphasizing the relationships we have in those communities, regardless of whatever obvious differences there are about us. And so hopefully this conversation and others can be a springboard to that effect. But just want to give you an opportunity to respond to that quickly, and then we'll go and take some audience questions.
Kevin, in 2017, Louisiana passed the Justice Reinvestment Initiative, which was modeled after Texas. And most definitely, Texas, even here in Louisiana, still consider Texas a law and order state. But you have shown that you can effectively reduce the prison population, close prisons, but still keep law and order, still have a much lower crime rate than Louisiana. And you have equally of large cities and vast number of people in your state. We can have a cost-effective criminal justice system that recognizes humanity, recognizes second chances, and keeps our public safe. And part of those reforms that we put through in 2017 here, the savings that the state is realizing is going back into community-based programs, into nonprofits like Goodwill, Volunteers of America, United Way. Many of these organizations are faith-based. They come from the community, and they also have input from people who have been in the system. And the biggest complaint I have heard since coming into the policy arena was people that are involved in the system have had little to no input in the policy making. We have not listened over the many years to people that have been incarcerated. We haven't listened to the probationer or parolee about what they saw, what was a barrier. And I think we're beginning to see a change in that. We're beginning to listen to everyone. Everyone's coming to the table, from law enforcement to district attorneys. This particular session in 2020, there was a newspaper article in The Advocate that talked about all the discord in the session, from tort reform to all sorts of things that was coming forward. But then it highlighted criminal justice, where it said this should be the model for lawmakers, where it was a bipartisan effort. Because what goals we're trying to achieve, no matter whether we're Republican or Democrat, are the same: to have a fair system that recognizes liberty for citizens, for United States citizens, for Louisiana citizens. And that's what we have to continue hammering in. And that's what TPPF was created for. And that's what Right on Crime came into action to apply these principles, our conservative principles, to this area of government that has been kind of left alone for far too long.
You know, and just a little bit of context, Scott, thanks for that response. For people outside Louisiana tuning in, this is in a legislature that's super majority conservative Republican with a Democrat governor, right?
Right.
Yeah. So there's a lesson there in terms of strategy. Alice, anything to add before we take our first audience question?
Yes. This is a big election year, but what we've got to know as citizens, no one person can solve this. No one who takes a government office, no elected official can solve this problem. We have to get involved to help solve these problems. We have got to get engaged in solving these problems that are out here. We've got to take responsibility. You know, there's a portion in Joshua, I think it's chapter 5, where the angel of the Lord showed up. And Joshua asked him, whose side are you on? And he said, I'm on the Lord's side. That's the side that I'm on. I'm on the side of what is right. And that's the side we've all got to be on. Let's forget about choosing the sides. Let's be on the Lord's side.
That's well said. No disagreement here at all. So it's a nice segue actually into our first audience question, which is an important question. It's a heavy question. And obviously both of you can weigh in. And our audience member asks, by sending a person back to prison, are you accomplishing making them better people? I guess they're asking about reentry. Or is your aim to protect society from those individuals committing crimes? Scott, you want to take that?
Okay.
I can take that. That is a tough question. There is a punitive role to sending someone to prison. And if they're already on probation and parole, sending them back to prison would require that they have violated those conditions. And you know, we should not be sending people to prison to make them better people, as far as that would be the initial goal of sending them there. We should work so much more on the front end to preventing them from ever having to go. Prison does have a dual role, but it should be rehabilitative in nature when they do get there. The old system of, as I mentioned earlier, of warehousing, where people just sat there, did their time. We have a lot of great programs here in Louisiana Department of Corrections that provides vocational training. If someone doesn't have a high school education, they work to, and if they're able to get it, they're able to get their GED, or it's high set now. And then they move them into different vocational training and give them the tools that they need to be successful once they leave, and address substance abuse and any other issues that come through. But there is a dual role to sending someone to prison. And as you said, there is a consequence for our actions. There is a consequence to breaking the law, and that has to be dealt with. But when we get to sentencing, and that's where we have to work on policy, is, you know, do we accomplish this by sending someone to prison for 20 years, or can we accomplish this for a shorter period, or by an alternative method?
Thank you. Alice?
I've seen so many people come back and forth. Prison becomes a revolving door, where their issues that they had are the same issues that they had when they were out before. They just come right back, and they're not addressed. Some of those issues are mental health. Some of them are substance abuse, and some of them are reentry issues. That's a big portion that we have to be there to support those who are coming out. We want them to be successful. We want them to have a pathway to being a productive citizen again. But there have been roadblocks that have been placed, not intentionally, that we are identifying that have to be removed from successful reentry back in society. Because most prisoners, most of them, are going to one day be released from prison. Do we want them to come back better?
Absolutely. We obviously have a vested interest. So nice transition into the second question from an audience member. Can you elaborate on resources and community organizations that are available to help reintegrate former prisoners?
Goodwill Industries is a perfect example. Goodwill Industries started with the goal of helping all people that need a job. They did not specify, whether this was a person that had been involved in the criminal justice system, but helping people to learn how, the Bible analogy, either give them the fish or teach them how to fish. Goodwill worked on teaching them how to fish, so to speak. Goodwill Industry works with helping people to get employed, helping them with housing. When someone comes out of prison, they're faced with many, many barriers, as Ms. Alice mentioned. A perfect example is Matthew Charles, who was released from prison in the First Step Act. He is at the State of the Union address with the president, but then has difficulty renting an apartment. This is a man that was able to I've never been to the State of Union address. So imagine the average person released from prison with no notoriety, no help, who obviously hasn't been to Washington, D.C., hasn't been there. Imagine the problems they're going to face. But there are many programs. Goodwill is just one example. There's a lot of smaller programs that were actually created by people that were formerly incarcerated, people that were involved in the justice system that understand and realize the problems, because employment, housing, transportation, all those are issues that people immediately face when they come out of prison. And there's great organizations that have been doing this for a long time that are out there and are established, that do great work, and they do it all behind the scenes as well. They're willing to help anyone, but they're playing a big role in reducing our recidivism rates and keeping our communities safer by giving people the opportunity and the chance to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
And we've worked with these groups here in Louisiana. Right on Crime has sponsored employer forums where we've gone to cities throughout the state, and we didn't bring in people from Baton Rouge or bring in me to speak. I went in and cultivated the local talent, so to speak, the local reentry people there. For if we were in Shreveport, we had just Shreveport people, and Monroe people, and we had employers and formerly incarcerated come together to show the community, because most people didn't realize, even the service providers did not realize the amount of help and services out there. We worked hand in hand with probation and parole. The 10 years I was with probation and parole, if I would have known the services that were out there, it would have made my job a lot easier. I can't do everything for everybody, but I can send someone to Goodwill and they can work with that person. And there's a better trust relationship. As a probation officer, I had a big gold state of Louisiana badge. I had a gun, a taser, pepper spray, 2 sets of handcuffs, 60 rounds of ammunition. And do you imagine a person whose first interaction with the criminal justice system was someone that looked just like me, someone with a gun, someone with a badge? And you have to earn that trust. Certain amount of trust and respect is given because of who you are, but the rest of that is earned. And sometimes people don't have that time to earn that trust from me, and they may be better served through a nonprofit that has walked in their shoes directly. And that I think is the talent and a source that we have to tap, that's going to help people move forward.
Alice, I'll ask you a very related follow-up, and this will end up being our last audience question in the interest of time, thinking about those nonprofits providing those services for former prisoners. Feel free to answer that, but I'm particularly interested, as one of our audience members is, on those kinds of alternatives for minors, or at least for young adults, for whom we hope they are going to have just a limited experience with the criminal justice system.
Yes, I'm going to tell you a big piece of this that is missing, but we've got to close that gap. Our faith community must get more involved, because this is who we are as people of faith. We believe in grace. We believe in redemption. We believe in second chances. The church has a big role to play in this. When you talk about young people and getting caught up in the system, there's got to be more of not bringing them into adult systems. I've been in prison with women who came into the juvenile system very young, and there was still nothing that deterred them, nothing that prepared them to go out and get good jobs. Many of them came from broken families. They came very much from the foster care system, and it went from juvenile to the big house, to the regular prison. And something's got to change with that, for we are not just throwing our juveniles away. Because if we don't get them into educational programs, don't get them into training, college is not for all of them. Some of them want skills trades. If we don't do a better job of making sure that we've equipped them to be successful in society, from juvenile to other prisons, to adult prisons, that's going to be their pathways. So we've got to do some intervention with them. And I think the faith community really and truly does play a big part in that.
They can play, as you said, an even bigger part. It's the part they played before we saw this change starting about 50 or 60 years ago, of the government steadily displacing those, what
true.
Some scholars call the mediating institutions of society. What do they mediate? They mediate our worst passions. They mediate our worst behavior, whether it's churches or, as I say, for my atheist friends, other institutions like that. Even the Rotary Club would be better. Goodwill would be better than just the absence of some kind of institution like that. So excellent conversation, Alice and Scott. I can't thank you enough. I do want to give you an opportunity to just give us a hopeful encouraging comment as we close. You know, we always like to take these policy conversations for our audience members, bring it down to the sidewalk level, think about what each of us can do ourselves as individuals. Scott, I'm going to turn to you first so that we can give Alice the last word.
That sounds great. I think Ms. Alice hit the nail on the head with bringing in our faith, faith institutions and churches, and many of the nonprofits I mentioned are faith-based and are bringing that concept and that reality to this issue, and moving into faith, having hope. And I've heard this word from many different people, and it's hope in something that is far much greater than what we have here today on where we live, whether it's in Texas, which there's a lot of hope there, or in Louisiana, where we inspire to hope. But we're not going to meet perfection here, but we can do everything we can as individuals to make this a better place to live. And if we follow these great Christian values of love for neighbor, concern for others, and live in community, it really hurts me, hurts my heart to see our nation in such discord, to see the flag, which for me, means so many things, our freedoms, the people that have died fighting for this country, and then to realize that there are people in our country that see a whole different thing when they see our flag. It's to bring this hope and bring everyone together, because we cannot be divided as a country, this seriously divided. Discord and good policy debate is what makes us stronger. But we have to have hope, and hope in something that's greater than what's here. Hope in our fellow man and our nation, that we can do better and that we can work to make things better for all citizens.
Thank you. Alice?
Well, I am so touched by everything, and I guess I'm getting just a little bit emotional about this, but I am so touched by the things that I'm seeing that is not reported. I'm so touched by the people that have called me wanting to know, what can we do to help? What can we do to help? What role do you see that I could play? I want to be supportive. And just listening to the voices, people send me things on my messenger. They write me letters. They contact my family members. I believe in the inherent goodness of people. Sometimes we can get stirred up and our anger, things can be around us and we lose sight of who we are. But I'm seeing people starting to now want to, and they're not afraid or ashamed to talk about this. There was a part of shame that I don't want to speak up. I don't want to be viewed in this way. But I'm seeing some of the most beautiful hearts being revealed, some of the most beautiful things that are starting to happen. And I've got so much hope that out of these ashes, as the word says, beautiful ashes, I believe that we are about to see beautiful ashes. I think that these opportunities that we have, we as Americans are going to rise to the occasion. And I think that we are going to demonstrate what it means to be an American and what it looks like to have a great country that we have that cares about its people, that cares about each other. I have not lost faith in us as a country. And that's my hope, is the inherent goodness of Americans, that we are going to get past this and we're going to come out of this better, and we're going to come out of this stronger, because no longer are we not having these conversations. We're not going to only have the conversations, but we are going to be people of action and rise to this occasion and this great opportunity that we have.
Thanks so much, Alice and Scott. You did a wonderful job, which is no surprise to me. And I am hopeful that for those of you in the audience, we accomplished our objective, which is to help take this country from discord to discourse. I think the two of you, Scott and Alice, said it well, both of you emphasizing the importance of hope and the inherent goodness of people. You know, it's only in a great country that we can even aspire to diagnose problems with this kind of candor while also aspiring to solve them. And that doesn't begin in Washington, D.C.
No.
It doesn't even begin in great state capitals like Austin, Texas, or Baton Rouge, Louisiana. It begins with us in our own homes, and our own families, our own communities, our own churches. Alexis de Tocqueville said it well. He said, America, if you ever think that you're going to have a broken system, you need to look at home and see what's wrong with you. That's what we need to be doing here in the 21st century. And by doing that, we don't need to go around and have shattered self-esteem, either individually or socially. What we need to do, as Alice Johnson and Scott Peyton have said, is to rise up as Americans, to know that we have been put here in this great country at this very delicate moment to make sure that we implement what I see as the culture of our inheritance. It is our inheritance regardless of where our ancestors came from to the United States. And what that inheritance is to aspire to that hope, to exercise our freedom, and in doing so, do so in a way that enables us to have conversations like what we've had today. And the only way we can cut through the loud, vocal chatter of those who would prefer to divide than unite us is to have conversations like this,
Yes.
and then put our hands together and pledge to solutions that lead them, whether that be, as we focused on today, criminal justice reform, or as I might focus on education reform, but really these upstream solutions to the problems facing America. So Scott Peyton, thank you for joining us. Alice Johnson, thank you for joining us. Thanks for being great colleagues with Right on Crime and the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Most of all, thanks for being good friends. May God bless you. May God bless Texas. And may God bless the great United States of America. Take care.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.